Hello, and welcome to the final week of the summer series provided by us from Inspiring Workplaces. Now, you're probably wondering where Matt's gone. He's just had a little pet emergency and he's currently at the vet with his beautiful Irish Terrier, Seamus. So, a quick intro from me. I'm Stefan Warburton and I handle the content and design aspect of Inspiring Workplaces. And I'm normally behind the scenes working on the summer series, but today I'll be covering in for Matt. I'm not usually in front of the camera, so please be nice. So enough about me and more about our speaker today. Kenyan born and now residing in Johannesburg, South Africa, she is the group CEO of EXP, Africa's largest experiential agency. She's been involved in the launch of EXP in 12 countries over the last 20 years and is a seasoned marketing and management professional. Her discussion today will be focused on the topic of millennials, of which I am one, and what the latest research says about our behaviours. So without further ado, please let me introduce Carol Abade. Hi, Carol.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Hi, thank you very much. And I'm glad you're a millennial, so you can validate some of the information that we got. Even though the study was really focused on millennials around the African continent, I find that there are lots of similarities.
That'd be really good. I have a lot of relatives who are millennials who live in Africa, so this will be quite interesting for me as well. So I'll leave it over to you and we get started.
Yes, thank you. So just a little bit of background around the study. The study was done over a period of about 2 months, and EXP Group, which is one of the partners of the study, is a leading Pan-African agency, and our focus is really on bringing consumer engagements to clients, both in an online and an offline environment. So the footprint covers a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, and some of the study results that you see come out of the sub-Saharan market. And what drove our thinking around it was there's been a lot of chat around millennials, um, mostly within the marketing circles. And we recognized that there wasn't anything that was specific to the African millennial and wanted to find out whether there's a really big difference between the African millennial and the global millennial. And that's some of what I'm going to share with you today. So the three cities that we looked at were Nairobi, Accra, and Lagos. And the reason for the selection of these cities is that they define a lot of millennial movements in both fashion, music, style, education, and taking a microcosm of this particular group of people who were able to build a huge database of about 12 million respondents into the study. So what you're going to see is quite a comprehensive feedback on this group of people. Now, typically, this is a fairly loose explanation of what a millennial is because it's a cohort that's born within a particular time, and our obsession with them has largely been driven by, I suspect, possibly their uptake on technology, some of their differentiating behaviors and habits. Um, and within the African context, on the left-hand side, you see a very different picture in terms of what their environment dictates versus what a particular millennial would be in a more developed scenario. And now, having said that, what's Africa's millennial landscape look like? From a total population perspective, the millennials have been growing for about 30 to 31%. And by 2050, 50% of the African population will actually be made up of millennials. And 69% will be made up of what are millennials and what are traditionally seen as Gen Zs. So a very big group of people. And why they're important and they're seen as a demographic importance to Africa is that the study estimates, the World Bank study estimates that just millennials entrepreneurship activities could reduce Africa's population from about 17 to 15%. Now that's massive. And the facts that we found out of the study were that actually millennials are value driven. They're big on trust, they're big on heritage, and they are trying to fit into a textbook that was written at a time that was not specific for them. And really, their view of the world, even within the African space, is very digital. They see things through a digital lens. They're the biggest uptake of digital solutions. And the digital revolution, as we see in Africa, significantly impacts them. And we also see that it is significantly impacting the way that we are relating with millennials in terms of solutions and driving very specific things to solve Africa's problems using tech. So when we looked at the study, we wanted to focus on three key areas. One was obviously money. So our research uncovered what the 20 top transactions are coming out of a millennial's wallet, who their connections are. So who do they trust? Who do they look for? Who do they look to for information that's valuable and trustworthy? And their time from a work perspective. So what is driving the millennials from a work perspective? Now, given that this study was done towards the back end of 2019 and then came COVID, some of the results that we see here today, we can analyze in terms of how is COVID going to impact that and what can we expect to see happening given what we've just experienced. So the first thing is that in reality, almost half the millennials that we interviewed haven't checked out of hotel mom and dad. So home, even before that, was a really critical point for them. Now, home has now merged into work and play and the whole experience around being at home, which has created, and I think is going to continue to create, a much bigger need for the influences of mom and dad in the lifestyle of a millennial and creating some friction around some expectations. And yet, what we find out of the research was that their biggest source of truth, despite what everybody may have thought, based on their reliance on social media, is actually family. So 76% of our respondents say they trusted their parents and other family members for guidance and honesty, and far less on what we would have seen as reliance on friends or social media influences. So they're not really backing tradition when it comes to real counsel. Now, what we're finding that it's creating is that disconnect. Because they're so digitally savvy, they're still living at home, they're still under influence of mom and dad. There's a limit in terms of the freedoms that they may have. And there's also a clash in terms of the career choices that they may make based on a much larger influence of a generation that was really focused on what would have been a traditional format of employment. And we think that post this COVID situation, we're going to see a much bigger drive in change, both of millennials and perhaps the earlier generations in terms of how we recognize the opportunity that lies in there. So the second thing that we looked at was what their social relationships are, because we did find that millennials are really driven around some core things. So the things that were important to them were peace and stability in the country. So up to 40% of them mentioned that as a big issue. And the second two were finding a good paying job and health. So obviously health and job security is going to continue to be more central as they're going to be highly impacted through this COVID experience. So unemployment rates in Africa were already a scary number. So 50% of the youth in Africa were already not contributing economically. And we're expecting that there is going to be a much bigger drive post-COVID around millennials being perhaps some of the early or the first losers in this cycle, and what impact that's going to have on them going forward and their ability to continue to contribute to society, as well as the ability to trust society to be able to offer them the security that they need for job creation and possibly career advancement. So as we continued to look through the process and looked at what is a typical millennial wallet look like. And I think that they have very low buying power. So 57% of our African millennials earn less than $200 a month in context. And what we want to share with you is just a kind of view about how do they actually spend the limited budget. So the share of wallet demonstrated to us that their power is not in the cash they earn, it's more in their numbers. and in their attitudes towards the money they earn. So they're a lot more forward-facing. They put away 19% of their earnings into some form of insurance or saving or investment, which is a really positive trend to see. And if you look at the kind of breakdown that we had, 75% of Africa's millennial is earning less than $200. So that's massive. And that explains why their contribution economically is very low. However, there were some things that came out that were obvious trends. So a big chunk of their top 10 is going into airtime. Banks are taking a large chunk of it. Betting is massive. And then they've got bills and utilities and entertainment coming far down. Again, we think there's going to be a big shift in this kind of pattern as more millennials are impacted. And also as people are looking at more discretionary patterns of spend and spending on things that are more relevant. So perhaps entertainment, restaurants, utilities, as people will be a lot more challenged with changing their priorities around living at home versus finding other ways to be able to co-share or co-live or moving back home might become possibilities for the millennials. And this was interesting for us because we then looked at the workplace. How is this impacting them from a workplace perspective? And what we saw was that they're really excited about work, but in a different way. So 61% of African millennials are not looking for jobs anymore. They believe that the smartest and the best way for them to make money, even at that time, was through being entrepreneurial. So they have high hopes for the promise of entrepreneurship. And your typical employment, which we had traditionally seen in the earlier generations, the doctor, engineers, the lawyers, were far less. And again, the recognition that within the entertainment industry, it's a short-lived space and is not perhaps the smartest way for them to be able to develop long-term wealth. So what that presented was also an opportunity to understand that because they are tech-enabled, they're overwhelmingly excited about technology. So technology is a big part of their everyday life. And I think that it provides them the opportunity to be able to better where they're at and impact them both negatively and positively. So where we see or where we think that this would shift is that the ability to utilize technology to leverage on their entrepreneurial spirit and promise might be the solution for solving the much needed problem around employment, as well as solving the problems that are facing them every day. So what drives them? It's personal growth and development. Again, a very positive sentiment that going post the COVID era, a lot of millennials will be able to utilize to be able to really find solutions that work for them and stop relying on perhaps government and government institutions to provide jobs or to provide any sort of security around their workspace. And the demand for brands was quite strong within this specific group of people. So again, a lot of these brands, some of them are global brands, some of them are very localized brands. But the question was, what three brands do the most good in the community? And from a millennial perspective, I think there's a huge space to capture their mind share within the continent. Most respondents don't see brands or companies actively impacting their societies. And again, starting to call them to order because we did find that there's a lot of social interest around the millennials, and they believe that doing good is good business. So really calling to account some of the things that we're seeing coming out even through this COVID era. So if we had to look at 4 key things that we took out of here that I think are going to possibly position us post-COVID as we carry on with the studies, is trying to understand what has really been the impact of the stay-at-home, the lockdowns, the job losses, and how can that be utilized positively to be able to leverage their ability as a mass and technology as their platform to solve a lot of the problems that are going to come in that have been forced upon them by this massive tectonic force of COVID. So the first is obviously career advancement and investment. The African millennium is looking for new knowledge and skills. They're looking for companies that can help future-proof and transform their opportunities in a big way. The second thing is that they're seeking a broader social purpose. So they care around what's happening in society. They care about security. They care about safety. And they're calling to account both governments and brands to be able to act in a socially responsible way. The third thing is they're willing to give back, and they are willing to hold into account what business is doing with the environment. So a lot of the discussions that we're having around big issues are really being driven through millennials. And they want recognition for hard work. So they are sensitive about companies that interact with local cultures and don't give credit. They want you to give credit, to reward, and to champion the local inspirations. And we're finding that they're building solutions that are able to tackle some of these challenges that we're seeing with especially at scale within the African continent. So I think from a research perspective, one of the things we did find was that they're not really a special breed. A lot of times they are considered as, perhaps a lot more entitled. Lazy has been a word that we find being used around millennials. And yet, as we are seeing, the changes happening within society, we're seeing millennials starting to stand up and improve and are asking for improvement of social lives, looking beyond the government. Solutions. They're looking at private sector to stand up and take action and responsibility for some of the actions. And really looking at driving the entrepreneurial spirit to be able to create a real force of change within the space of unemployment and within the space of solving community problems within the continent. And so I think that one of the discussions that we had going into the discussion around millennials within the continent was how different did we find them to be? This is what the studies have shown around the global millennials. Obviously, they're not coming into the workplace with a lot of college debt. A lot of them continue to rely on their parents for sustenance, and family is going to continue to play a really big role in being able to provide real society support and support for this growing force of young people coming into the workplace in the continent. So over to you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Carol. Very interesting talk. I mean, just listening to what you're saying about, millennials in Africa, wanting credit and everything else in work, it seems to mirror certain things we have here in the UK. So I don't know whether you consider this is maybe more of a global millennial thing rather than just a Pacific African thing.
Yeah, I think we've seen that happening across multiple societies, especially during this COVID period. Again, just driving accountability, asking for change, inequality, and injustice. So yeah, we are seeing that that's a common thread across the different continents.
So I guess one question that I have regarding your speech is, you mentioned how 61% of millennials are pushing more towards entrepreneurship rather than sort of settling for a normal salary job. What do you think the impact has that had in employers in trying to attract young talent? Have you seen in Africa, Sorry guys, I think Carol's just left us, unfortunately. I will try to see if I can get her back.
I lost you there for a minute,
Hi there,
Stefan.
Kim. Yeah, sorry about that. Back. So, have you seen companies in Africa and South Africa find new different ways to try to attract employees, young millennial talent?
So, no, not yet. I think there's a recognition that whilst every millennial would like to run their own business, and not everybody can, but I do believe that business can give them an opportunity to be the drivers of innovative solutions and the drivers of new and different ways of doing things, solving company problems as an entrepreneurial possibility within their organizations. So I think there's a move away from millennials are lazy and entitled into a new understanding of what is this kind of tech savvy, um, different, exposed group of people want, and how can we provide a workplace that actually speaks to those needs. I think one of the things we saw in the study was everybody thought millennials want flexi time, but actually in Africa, that's true. They're quite willing to work on the normal hours, work in the office. And I don't know how the work from home with them. And I think far less because for many of them who are still living with their parents and have had to deal with the challenges of working from home, living from home, schooling from home, we are finding that many of them are looking forward to going back to the office.
Perfect. Nice to hear. Um, I mean, we're locked down in London as well, and a lot of sort of the UK have been working with remote working during this time, but a lot of companies done it before. So for some people, especially millennials that I know, working from home has been quite a sudden jump, and a lot of them are actually looking forward to getting back in the office and being more social. Um, Another question that I had is maybe you might not be able to answer this, but have you had a look at what the generation after us, Gen Z, have been looking at and sort of how they're differing from us slightly?
So, no, we didn't go into the specifics of the Gen Z study, but I do think that there are going to be significant differences. And I think a lot of them are going to be based on how they've experienced the world, as have many other generations, because our experience of the world determines some of the decisions that we make that are big life changing decisions. So, whilst millennials may have been, part of a digital transition, Gen Zs are born into, by the time they came around, it was a full digital revolution. So their view and their lens of the world is also slightly different. And now on top of that, their schooling has been interrupted, and we're finding that it's having a big effect on Gen Zs. And it should create a completely different experience as they go into the workplace, I would imagine.
Perfect. And I guess one more question from me might be a bit of a sort of selfish one. What one thing should millennials consider moving forward? Are there any blind spots that we might not be looking at in terms of work, life, and things in general?
Um, I think that there is a place for experience, and I think accepting that generations that have come before millennials have probably experienced a lot of different changes in their lives that they could bring to bear and that could help millennials navigate what may seem to be very unusual circumstances. So I think, you know, I think my generation or the generation just before me has gone through two or three recessions, and every single one thinks that everyone is different, but they all have an impact in how we think and how we view the world. I think millennials can definitely learn from those experiences. They've seen the destruction of society in different ways through war. Again, the effect is going to be the same. The behaviors will be impacted as um, society is looking for other ways to be able to solve some of these problems. So the pandemic has definitely had a big impact on millennials, and I think will continue to have an impact about how they view the world and what, you know, perhaps society or governments or or businesses have to offer. But taking from those past experiences would probably fast track their ability to navigate some of the challenges.
Perfect. I mean, amazing advice and insight. I mean, I feel like millennials, as we're sort of moving into the work and moving through life, I feel like there are some blind spots that we might not consider, and I think it's good to have an oversight of, maybe someone who's not really in generation to sort of give us an idea of direction and maybe highlight things that we're not really taking focus in.
Mm,
Well, Carol, thank you very much for your talk today. This has been very insightful.
great.
Is there anywhere someone can contact you for more information regarding this talk?
Yeah, the study is available, so you can reach me on LinkedIn. It's Carol at EXP, and I can share a copy of the full study.
Perfect. And just for our listeners today, this video will be available on demand on our website from tomorrow. So you will be able to have a look and revitalize through all of Carol's presentation. And I'll also leave her information there so you can contact her further. So, Carol, thank you very much again. Enjoy
Thank
the
you,
rest
Steph.
of your evening.
I
And
will do. Thank you.
hope you have a great week.
Thanks very much, and to everybody, it was a great pleasure. My regards to
Perfect.
Matt.
Thank you. So thank you very much for listening today, guys. Again, we will have everything provided for you in our website before, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, where Matt hopefully should be back to cover our next summer series talk. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.